When you think about it, maybe wearing grey in the middle of a forest or a battlefield does actually make you stand out. When we think about army uniforms today, we probably imagine the green camouflage patterns that would help someone blend into their environment. During World War II, Allied soldiers in particular were found dressed in mostly green uniforms, but their enemies, the Germans or the Wehrmacht, the German army, were in a completely different colour, grey. This is of course very different to what the Allies wore, and the Germans tended to stick to darker colours. For example, even the SS wore their infamous black uniforms, which during night fighting could have actually been helpful to allow them to blend in. But why did the Wehrmacht and German soldiers wear grey? The main reason the Wehrmacht wore grey uniforms during World War II is simple. Grey helps soldiers blend into the battlefield better than brighter colours. Before the First World War, many armies still wore very colourful uniforms. German soldiers in the 1800s often wore dark blue uniforms with very shiny buttons and decorative helmets. Let's think of even the redcoats, for example. You wouldn't be struggling to find one of them on a battlefield. These uniforms may have looked impressive on parade grounds, but modern warfare changed everything. By the 1900s, rifles, machine guns and artillery had become far more accurate and deadly. Soldiers wearing bright colours could easily be spotted and then shot. Because of this, armies all across Europe began changing to duller colours that were harder to see from a distance. Germany adopted a field grey colour known in German as Feldgrau. Yep, literally translates as field grey. Despite its name, it wasn't actually pure grey. It was actually a mix of grey, green and sometimes brown tones. In forests, muddy fields, ruined cities and overcast European weather, this colour worked well as camouflage. It helped German soldiers disappear into the background more effectively than old bright uniforms. The German army had already learned very harsh lessons during the First World War as well. Trench warfare showed how dangerous visibility could be. Soldiers standing out against a landscape became easy targets for snipers and artillery observers. During World War I, Germany used field grey uniforms extensively, and the colour became strongly associated with the German military. When the Nazis rebuilt the armed forces in the 1930s, the Wehrmacht continued using the same general colour because it had proven practical and effective. Other countries also reached a similar conclusion. The British used khaki, the Americans used olive drab, and the Soviets used brownish-green uniforms. All major armies were trying to reduce visibility on the battlefield. The colour also suited the landscapes where Germany expected to fight. Much of Europe contained forests, muddy countryside, cloudy skies and ruined urban areas. Grey-green uniforms blended in surprisingly well in these conditions. In places like France, Poland and the Soviet Union, the muted colour helped soldiers merge into forests, dirt roads, smoke, rubble and shadows. A brighter colour would have made soldiers much easier to spot. The uniform colour could also vary depending on the factory and the year of production. Early war uniforms often had more green in them, while later war uniforms sometimes appeared more brown or dull grey, because Germany began suffering shortages of dyes and materials. The grey uniforms also created a professional and intimidating appearance. Nazi Germany placed huge importance on discipline, order, and military image. The uniforms were designed to look modern, serious, and efficient. German uniforms became famous for their very sharp appearance. Officers especially often wore tailored versions that looked smart and strict. The dark field grey colour contributed to that image. It gave the Wehrmacht a colder and more militarised look, compared to brighter uniforms from earlier eras. The Nazis also used these uniforms as propaganda. Films, posters and parades frequently showed soldiers in clean grey uniforms marching in perfect formation. This helped create the image of a disciplined, unstoppable army. But grey uniforms were also very practical because, well, they hid dirt reasonably well. Soldiers spent long periods of time outdoors in mud, smoke, dust and rain. Lighter colours became filthy very quickly, while field grey could hide stains better. This did matter during long campaigns where uniforms could not easily be cleaned or replaced. A practical battlefield uniform needed to survive harsh conditions and still remain useful. Some people wonder though why the Wehrmacht did not use full camouflage uniforms for everyone. Germany actually was one of the first countries to develop advanced camouflage clothing during the war. Special camouflage patterns were especially used by the Waffen SS. However, producing camo uniforms for millions of soldiers was very expensive and also complicated. Field grey was a good compromise because it was cheap, simple to mass produce, and still offered decent concealment. Camo smocks, helmet covers, and specialist uniforms did become more common later in the war, especially amongst elite and frontline units, but the standard Wehrmacht soldier usually continued wearing field grey. By the Second World War, field grey had become very much part of the German military identity. German soldiers had worn similar shades since before 1914, and the colour was deeply linked to the army itself. Even after the war, many people immediately associated field grey uniforms with German soldiers. The colour became one of the most recognisable features of the Wehrmacht. So the Wehrmacht wore grey uniforms because modern warfare demanded concealment rather than bright military fashion. Field grey helped German soldiers to blend into European battlefields. It reduced visibility for the enemy, hid dirt reasonably well, and created the disciplined image that the Nazi regime wanted. Although often called just grey, the uniforms were really a carefully chosen grey-green shade, designed for practicality and survival in a modern industrial war. But yeah, the German army uniform was massively different to the Allied uniforms, and of course in the final days of the war, soldiers were just thrown out to fight, wearing anything they had on their backs, regardless of whether it could be called a uniform or not. I'm pretty sure Hitler and his generals come April 1945 would have had German men wearing bright pink underwear as long as they tried their best to repel the Soviet advances and attacks. And I'm sure he wouldn't be bothered. Thanks for watching. If you did find this video interesting, maybe click subscribe. Once again, thank you so much for watching one of these videos.